Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, this is going to be the Zero to Hero episode on the Lethal Mirage Fulgurite Bladedancer. So, if you are old watchers of the channel, you will know that Lethal Mirage is one of my pet projects. I really enjoy Lethal Mirage a lot. It is one of my favorite skills in Last Epoch currently. It definitely gives me that flicker strike feel without also being completely meme material, right? Like it's a fully functional build without too many issues. Back in the day, it used to do absurd amounts of damage, and it still does absurd amounts of damage, but slightly less, as the game has started to actually catch up with it in terms of power creep. As turns out, doing maybe 4.1 million damage per click right now may seem like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, with how much HP Harbingers end up getting, right, it's actually not that much, which is crazy to think about, to be honest. So we did get to empowered monos, and immediately right out of the gate we got double Fulgurite shard thanks to how easy they are to get with runes of ascendance. And I went and clicked the dummy. 4.1 million damage with one click. Now, of course, that's like a bunch of 300k hits, right? It's like a bunch of 300k hits, but still, that's like 17 hits of 300k damage. That's a lot of damage, turns out. That is a lot of damage. Lethal Mirage, you can't really play as a DPS skill until you get access, of course, to Fulgurite shards. So if you don't know, Fulgurite shard is a unique dagger that's normally utilized with chakrams to make the lightning chakrams do a lot of damage. That's usually how they're used, but there's also some other lines on the item, turns out. You can play it with Lethal Mirage. Now, the biggest problem with this build overall is the fact that if you were to use it for clear, you just don't cycle through your Lethal Mirages enough. So, for instance, for bossing, you do plenty of damage, but for clearing, it doesn't matter how much damage you do, you can do infinite damage to that Marsh Beetle. It's not going to save you from the other Marsh Beetle that didn't get hit by your melee attack, right? So you end up having to make kind of a compromise here, and this is it, utilizing double Fulgurite shard and of course using cooldown on every single piece of gear. This brings our cooldown all the way down to like 6 to 5 seconds, depending how much cooldown you have. You could get even more if you push even further. But the idea here is to reduce our cooldown on our Lethal Mirage as much as possible so that we can essentially just do as much damage as possible while also not sacrificing our clear. Now, speaking of clear, one of the biggest reasons most Lethal Mirage setups don't feel good for clear is most people don't use the increased area with Lethal Mirage attacks. Idols, it ends up being a lot of AoE in general, using that using the idols. Also, as well, you can get increased area on your gear as well now, on your prefix of your gloves and prefix of your amulet. All of that combined actually makes the area clear not feel as bad. And as long as, of course, you are doing it properly and doing the rotation properly every 6 seconds, it doesn't end up feeling as bad as it normally would. Now, of course, this is a combo rogue. The idea is we build up a bunch of perfection stacks for a lot of percent damage. On top of that, we also make sure to maintain full life while we're trying to do our Lethal Mirage. On top of that, we also utilize a shift and shadow package. We get a bunch of more damage and extra mirages based on our shadows. And then, of course, we utilize shift to make our next skill after Lethal Mirage always crit, meaning that we don't have to invest a single lick into crit chance, which gives us lots more room to invest into damage, which doesn't even feel that bad, to be honest, as, shift has a very low cooldown with this setup, so it's not that big of a deal. And it also gives our next attack after Lethal Mirage a lot of more damage. All of this combined leads to a Lethal Mirage that does a lot of damage, turns out. But like I said before, it doesn't really feel like that much damage, unfortunately. Like, it is one of the faster clear times of bosses. It's like more than average. But the problem is the power creep has gotten so strong that I can say, oh, I did 4.1 million damage with one click and not be as impressed, because the amount of damage you need to properly clear the end game now in a reasonable amount of time where you're not spending 5 minutes on every single boss has raised significantly. Now, hopefully in the future, this isn't that big of an issue because we are getting a little bit of power creep next patch. Also, as well, this build isn't like nearly finished at all. Remember, the 0 to hero runs that are done within 8 to 14 hours at most, meaning that, you know, you could actually, I don't know, actually gear the character maybe and probably get double to triple the amount of damage that I'm doing right now. But of course, you know, this is day one. We're talking about day one stuff. But for day one, pretty good. The tankiness actually doesn't feel that bad on the build for a rogue specifically because we're immune for half the time that we're doing damage anyways, right? Whenever we're actually going and interacting with the boss, we're actually immune to damage thanks to Lethal Mirage thing. So the more cooldown you get, the tankier you get because of that. Also as well, you have a smoke bomb, and of course you can reduce that cooldown very low and get like silver shrouds, and then of course you have the really low cooldown on shift as well. Just all in all, fun build. Not the best clear, but very safe bossing. Definitely like up there in terms of the builds that I would suggest. More of a meme build versus other Blade Dancers, but if you like Flicker Strike, this is the build for you. Now, with all that being said, if you haven't already, I would heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, as that's the best way of currently supporting me. It does help out a lot, by the way, when you guys like and comment on the video, as I put a lot of effort into this. As you may well know, I play a lot of Last Epoch. Remember, just between this build and the last build that I played was maybe 4 to 5 failures. Remember, I get all those characters, so like empowered monos, test them, realize their damage is shit, and then delete the character and then play a new character, because I have very high standards when it comes to the series, as I want to give you guys good builds, not just ass builds that function okay on day one. Now, let's go in the video and talk about it, shall we? So before we go into your scheduled programming, a lot of people were telling me that my content was worse for not having this in the video. So we're going to be doing a skill rotation. So the idea for this build is we are building around Lethal Mirage. So we throw down our smoke bomb. Not only does it give us a lot of stacks of flat damage, it also creates shadows for our Lethal Mirage, right? So we throw down our smoke bomb, and then either we run through the monolith or wait on the boss and build up our perfection stacks, which gives us increased damage and a lot of dodge so that we can sit there and not immediately die to the boss's abilities. So throw down this, then we shift, use Lethal Mirage. That is the rotation. Use smoke bomb, wait, shift, Lethal Mirage, and that's pretty much the rotation. It's nothing too crazy. I do use decoy every so often if I need to like group up enemies. Other than that, that is the skill effect rotation for, you know, people who, you know, if you need it, right? There you go. Number 20, man. That means we've been doing 20 of these, and it seems like as though we're going to end up doing more at this point, considering, you know, having to wait for the patch. Of course, minions are okay, man. Minions are okay, man. Totally. So we're going to be leveling with the same setup as always. We're going to be leveling with Bow Puncture and Umbral Blades Bleed. You know, if you've seen one, you've seen it all. It's really not that like complicated. We're just going to speed through the leveling process. Make sure to kill the first armored phoenix that you see, as they do drop a bow, which you can, you know, of course, use immediately instead of having to like do this awkward transition where you're playing melee for a little bit and then have to swap into using a bow. Act 1, we're just simply going to puncture Respec's Orient to death. Make sure to grab the node that gives you Frenzy after you use puncture first, as that is just a very large amount of extra damage early on as you attack just way faster. Nothing too crazy, you know, nothing too crazy, just simply using puncture and trying to stack ailment damage currently. Act 2 is simply the same. One little trick that I've learned over the past few times I've leveled this setup specifically is to utilize Smoke Bomb and specialize into it instead of Shift. This gives us a little bit less mobility, but what it ends up giving us is a lot more single target damage early on, as there are nodes that can give you up to 200% bleed chance with Puncture early on, and that ends up being integral to making your single target not feel like ass early on, I found. Here's some gameplay of me utilizing Umbral Blades and Puncture. So this is right before I ended up getting the spinning node and Umbral Blades. But thankfully, Umbral Blades just has a gigantic more damage multiplier. So you can actually build up your Puncture stacks, your Bleed stacks, and then use Umbral Blades and then like recall them and stuff like that, right? Lots and lots of damage even without the spinny blades. If you want a more detailed leveling experience, I actually recently made a 3-hour VOD of me leveling Rogue, how you should level it next patch, at least in my opinion, the way that I level all of my Rogues, and will be leveling my Rogues in the future, as long as there isn't any crazy balance decisions. And of course, I can always fix it if that happens, right? All right, here's Emperor's Remains. We did choose Bladedancer, of course, as this has to be on a Bladedancer, right? But bam, Emperor's Remains over. I am just going to skip to the end of Act 3 because it's literally the same build that I've leveled with multiple times now. If you really want a detailed version of it, I would suggest checking out the 3-hour VOD, as that will be a lot more educational than this video specifically. It's just showing you the kind of leveling that I do choose for the character, which is, of course, Bleed, Puncture, and Umbral Blades. So here's our first monolith. I swapped way too soon. Like, let me tell you, I swapped into Lethal Mirage way, way, way too soon. I was missing way too much damage at this point, as it made the clear feel really shitty, to be honest with you. I would heavily suggest not swapping this early. See, this is why I play the builds instead of just like playing offline and like, instantly getting a character like level 100 and just like, making a video based like that, or like choosing to use a leveled character in Legacy. That's the whole fucking point of this series, is being able to tell you like, hey, don't respec at level 40. I'll just playing the Bleed, Puncture, Umbral Blade setup for a little bit longer until pushing into Lethal Mirage. So keep that in mind when you do this, but the damage is like okay. The biggest problem was I just had no access to cooldown recovery speed, and the gear that I had was really bad. I was streaming at the time I was playing this build, which meant I wasn't really paying too much attention to my gear, and I went and looked back at it a little bit more, and my gear was just really bad. Now, I'm using decoy here to spawn more shadows, but I realized later on that you actually don't end up needing decoy for this. Now, here's our A-bomb here. Let's see here. It's like okay damage. We did do like half his damage in one burst, but I'm pretty sure if I had better gear, I could have killed him faster. Very unfortunate showing here. We could have killed him in one tap if I had better gear at this point. So here's the second monolith. For the gameplay rotation of the character, a lot of people have been asking me to include this kind of stuff. And here I'll say the gameplay rotation is you simply throw down Smoke Bomb off cooldown, and then you just walk around and you prepare up of course, a Lethal Mirage. You shift Lethal Mirage, and then it automatically crits, and then just put down another Smoke Bomb and continue on. It's pretty smooth gameplay, all things considered. It's not like the fastest favor per hour, but it's definitely faster than like a minion build per se, right? As when you do click the Lethal Mirage button, most of the screen dies. Especially later on when you just have better gear, and much better gear, right? One of the biggest things with Lethal Mirage, it's very important for its gameplay, is when you are playing it, you need to make sure that you're doing enough damage that you're one-shotting trash. That's very important. While I'm in progression like this, that doesn't happen as easily, but you definitely want to be one-shotting trash, because the way that Lethal Mirage works is it targets the nearest enemy. So if you kill things in one hit, then that Mirage will go towards the next enemy, the next enemy, the next enemy, right? And as long as you have enough decent melee AoE, what can happen is you can end up like pretty much going all across the screen in terms of like DPS and stuff like that. So as long as your damage is high enough, which the crit version definitely has, right, you can end up actually clearing a lot more than you think you normally would. But the increased area with Lethal Mirage helps out significantly, as you're overlapping attacks a lot more, which means, of course, more DPS in general. Here's a riot kill here. I can't tell. Yeah, we still don't have the Fulgurite daggers yet, which is fine. This is a good showcase of like what the build looks like without the investment. As you can see, we are doing like very large chunks of his HP every single time we actually click Lethal Mirage. This is what I mean about Lethal Mirage being a very good and consistent leveling experience. You never have to worry about killing the bosses, if that makes sense. Like, I have never had issues with my single target as a Lethal Mirage build. I've had issues with my clear, of course, but I've never had issues with my single target. And it's just kind of like old reliable at this point, even with the ridiculous amount of HP that Harbingers have now, even with that much, Lethal Mirage still can chew through it pretty easily thanks to all the power creep and stuff like that. But overall, it's been a okay experience with Lethal Mirage. Like I said, the clear could be a bit better, but like it's serviceable for a build that like bosses so smoothly. You got to have like a little bit of like a checks and balances. Like imagine if Lethal Mirage did have good clear on top of the single target, then there would probably be a problem here and there, and it would probably merit a nerf. But right now, Lethal Mirage is in this really weird spot where it's good enough to do all of the end game pretty much and do it pretty well, while also being mediocre at clear, so that it's never too OP, but it's strong enough to like just kind of carry you through bosses and you don't have to think too much, which is important to some people. Here's our Lagan. Gonna skip to phase 2 because it always takes forever no matter what you do, as he likes to force you into the cutscene down below. As you can see, we're still doing plenty of damage, even with like getting constantly hit by Lagan and stuff like that. I was more worried about my chonkiness more than anything here. Here's our Emperor of Corpses. This is actually one of the worst boss fights in the game for this build, mainly because all of the zombies that he summons here, they actually snag all of your Lethal Mirage hits, and you don't end up actually, of course, focusing them on him specifically. This actually ends up being kind of a bitch of a problem later on when I get to like my 10th Harbinger, where like, the Emperor of Corpses takes like 2 minutes, but my Harbinger only takes a minute, which is crazy considering how much HP difference they have. Here's my Spirits of Fire. As always, you want to kind of like, make it so that they kind of group together. We do have the Fulgurite shards at this point, I believe. So this is where the magic happens. This is where our cooldowns are really low. This is where our damage is pretty high. I did manage later, as you'll see, slam a really good Fulgurite, but overall, this is where the build really begins, right? One thing I noticed, I wasn't keeping up too many bleeds on single target, but we managed to fix that later. But as you can see, lots and lots of damage. Very, very, very nice. Very happy with it currently. Just to give you some gameplay of the Fulgurite shardage here, it's a lot better when you have the Fulgurite shards. As you can tell, by the time we actually leave Lethal Mirage, we end up being able to just go right back into Lethal Mirage, which ends up being a significantly smoother gameplay loop than earlier, as you saw. Now we can simply spam Lethal Mirage and not have to be at the whims of cooldown recovery speed, right? Like, by the time I am out of Lethal Mirage, we're pretty much going to go back into Lethal Mirage. Like, it's a very short amount of time, just enough time to actually build up mana, because remember, Lethal Mirage is actually going to cost a lot of mana because we have the 80 mana for 40% more, no, the 40 mana for 80% more damage at the top of Bladedancer, like the lethal coating or whatever, like coated blades. And then we also just, it's a 40 mana skill as well on top of that. And we're also using shift, we're using smoke bomb. So we're spending actually a lot of currency. So thankfully Puncture can actually do this. Puncture has a few different uses for the build. The first reason is for the bleed stacks, because we do more damage versus bleeded targets. Also, as well, it helps us stack up our perfection stacks. There's a lot of percent damage as well. Here's our Herot kill. Of course, I skipped it so that, we could actually fight him properly, because, no one wants to watch the cutscenes that you have to go through waiting for him. Unfortunately, we didn't skip him, but whatever. Now, here's our first Harbinger, Harbinger of Fear. At this point, like I said, we were doing that absurd amounts of damage at this point. As you'll see, the Harbinger of Fear, literally get to 50% HP on the dot with one attack. Just absolutely absurd. The second attack, we don't get all the way through, but like, really, we have the damage at this point. Just to give you an idea of how much damage we're actually doing here, here's a DPS check. We're getting like the 200 to 300k hits on the dummy here currently, and that doesn't seem like a lot, but it ends up being a lot considering we hit 17 times in a row, and that's without lethal Mirage affixes on our chest, giving us, I think, like +4 Mirages or something stupid like that. So this is where the gods decide that this run is blessed for some reason. I had double Fulgurite, and they have really low legendary potential rolls, so you can get ones with LP pretty quickly. As you can see here, I'm trying to hit that T6 melee lightning on this Fulgurite shard, and we hit it. Of course we hit it, and now time to do a lot of damage. Turns out, time to do a lot of damage. Now here's the Harbinger of Chaos. So of course, you'll probably know exactly what's going to happen with this, as you did see the last Harbinger, which died very quickly. And now, of course, we have the better Fulgurite shard here. So it's not really going to take that long to kill him. Unfortunately, sometimes you can miss your combo. Unfortunately, with the auto crit on shift, you have to be very careful. I did actually end up putting Umbral Blades into the build when we consume shadows, mainly to scale our armor shred and also as well scale our bleed stacks so that we get the most benefit out of lethal Mirage. That's actually one problem I end up having with this build, is I don't end up stacking enough armor shreds overall, but with some investment you could fix that very easily, right? Just need a little bit more armor shred than I currently have now that I'm noticing it. There you go, Harbinger of Chaos. So here's our first Oribus here. I'm sure you can guess what's about to happen to him. Oh, look! He's dead. So here's the third Harbinger, Harbinger of Treason. I'm going to try to show the full boss fights with this. Thankfully, the boss fights are actually pretty short, so I can actually show the full boss fights without it getting too boring here. But you can see Harbinger of Treason already knocked out like most of its HP already, just by talking here real quick. As you can see, very smooth bossing. Like, I can't really complain, thanks to on top of the silver shrouds and the shift and all the decent amounts of dodge that we end up getting. As you can see, we can even maintain a decent amount of course, perfection stacks for that nice juicy armor and dodge. Like, just all of it combined leads to just being a very comfy play style for the most part, right? And if we really need to play safe, we can play safe if we need to, right? As you can see here, I try to snipe him off screen, but that didn't end up working. But, you know, just a lethal Mirage and he's dead. Here's the second Oribus. It's just funny watching them die so quickly with lethal Mirage. You know, I'm so used to playing builds that actually have to interact with boss mechanics, you know. I'm just so used to that. Now, like, oh, I accidentally, like, I think I got hit or something and I lost my perfection stacks or something, but the second lethal Mirage does. Now, here's some gameplay of 232 Corruption. As you can see, we actually ended up dropping some AoE idols for lethal Mirage. Now, as you can see, the AoE on it is significantly better than before, causing our clear to go up through the roof here. Even with our lower cooldown, like, we can just cycle through lethal Mirages and we end up just feeling a lot better. Also, another thing is our cooldown is so low on our lethal Mirage that I can put down one smoke bomb and that will work for 2 rotations of lethal Mirage because of how long the smoke bombs last and of course the cooldowns. And it ends up feeling pretty good because now you just put down a smoke bomb, use your lethal Mirage, go to the next pack, use lethal Mirage, and then put down another smoke bomb. And it ends up making you feel a lot better. It's more very, very combo roguey, right? Like very combo roguey. And if you like this kind of playstyle, you're going to love this kind of build. Now, of course, the clear isn't that good. You know, it's not as good as some other builds. You do have to do some work every so often, but once you get into the rotation, it's not that big of a deal. And for how smooth the bossing is, it's the smallest price you can pay. Like even there, like the clear doesn't look awful. Like it's just serviceable. And you know what? Sometimes serviceable is completely fine. Now here's the super anti-melee Harbinger. Unfortunately, that damage over time necrotic stuff is pretty damning. It is really annoying, as you know, it does do a lot of damage, as we can't really stand in it much, as you know, rogues don't really have that much damage over time defense early on, like day one, as all of your defenses are relying upon silver shrouds, dodge, and glancing blows. And as you can see, you know, damage over time bypasses all of these at the same time. So you have to be very, very, very careful with your positioning on this fight. You need to kind of like keep him away from his necrotic dot pool while also avoiding the void dot pools. As of course, you know, if he puts a few void dot pools on your face, that will spell utter doom for your Blade Dancer. As you can see, the damage output is still really high. We're still scaling. We're still pushing corruption. We're still doing a good job. Nothing too crazy for this build. All right, now this is the part of the video where we start the boss rush. So there's the Harbinger of War. Here's another Orbis to push even more corruption here. And it's kind of awkward, dude. You're like, they're like 5% HP and you're waiting for Lethal Mirage. Here's the 6th Harbinger. Again, literally hanging by a loose thread, as always, you know, of course. Now here's some 300 corruption gameplay. As you can see, like our gameplay in Monolith hasn't really changed that much. It's essentially the same thing as it was before. Simply put down Smoke Bomb, shift, Lethal Mirage, use Puncture for mana, rinse and repeat. Nothing too crazy. You want to corral enemies into like kind of like an AoE per se. Like you want to like walk around them and kind of corral them properly. Because if you do this, it ends up making your clear a bit better and you end up doing it a little bit faster. Sometimes, you know, I forget to do this, but you definitely should do it. Where of course you kind of leash enemies near you and of course do a little bit of a corral. But as you can see there, our range of our Lethal Mirage is pretty high. So as long as our Lethal Mirage is actually doing competitive amounts of damage, our clear shouldn't be that much of an issue, right? Here's the 7th Harbinger, Harbinger Defilement. Here's the 8th Harbinger. This one was a little bit more difficult as, you know, you do have to worry about the beam and the super melee stuff, right? You do have to like stand in the center of him. Here's the 9th Harbinger, Harbinger of Defilement again. I'm really annoyed that they have the same fucking name. I think it's a bug. I don't think they're supposed to. Now here's the Harbinger of Destruction. While this plays, let's talk about the build in detail. Let's rate it. The single target, triple S. It's as good as you'd want it at this point without it being utterly broken. If you want more DPS than this, you're going to want something that is probably going to get nerfed next patch, which is not a good idea, right? Cool. Second thing, clear. Clear is serviceable. The single target is so smooth and so good that I am willing to completely overlook the okay clear that we currently have. You could have much better, for sure, definitely. But right now, this feels a lot comfier. Because, you know, like, sure, our clear is not the best, but we're also immune for half of it, right? Like, oh, there's a bunch of like diamond matrons and stuff on my screen. I don't care. Lethal Mirage, go burr, right? So it's not like as if it's bad. It's just slower than other options, but it's still not as slow as a fucking minion build, let me tell you, right? And survivability, so it's a little squishy because it's a dual wielding dagger rogue without that much glancing blow investment. But you know, we're immune half the time. We have silver shroud uptime. Like the tankiness isn't a problem. It's just more of something you have to think of. Now, something completely unrelated to this. We finally finished a cycle run on Drake form. It only took 100 speed while also spamming the ever-living fuck out of freeze and just as much speed and HP as possible to make up for the fact that, you know, Drake form is kind of bad. But finally, 5th cycle. Now I can play something fucking else, dude. All right, so let's talk about the build, shall we? So for Lethal Mirage here, we have pretty much, we're grabbing all of the extra Mirages because we want as much damage and clear as possible, as more Mirages means more damage and more, you know, single target. We also grab the more damage here, hit damage bleed per stack, right? We get this by applying bleeds with our other stuff, right? Like mainly puncture and umbral blades. Our Lethal Mirage actually won't apply bleeds because it'll actually apply shocks instead. So you do have to make sure that you have a different way of applying them, which is fine. We then grab Shadow Eater, which consumes our 5 shadows to give us 5 more hits, right? Then we also grab 4 points in Umbral Feast to deal 40% more damage per shadow. All of this combined leads to a Lethal Mirage that does a very large amount of damage. Now, one thing that I did was I actually reduced the amount of damage that I deal, and I went for Rending Darkness. The idea here is we end up getting a very large amount of flat dodge from this. We get the Phantasmal Presence to give us it for 6 seconds. And the idea here is, I can show you here, we end up with a very large amount of dodge for the entirety of the duration of waiting for Lethal Mirage. So it's pretty much permanently 1500 dodge for free. Now, of course, if you want to deal more damage, you can actually take all this out and go for more damage through, Ravaging Mirage and Shocking Grasp and stuff like that. But, I wanted more defenses when I was in Monoliths and stuff like that. Then for Puncture, it's utility Puncture, just mana on hit here, mana on the tree, Frenzy for the attack speed, the bleeds for the bleed stack so that we can apply more bleeds for Sundering Blows, then as well Rapid Strikes for just fast attack speed. And that's pretty much it for Puncture, nothing too crazy. The main reason for Puncture here is not only for the bleeds, like I said, but it's also for stacking up Perfection stacks for the increased damage and for the massive amount of dodge and armor that you get from it. Now, also is all, mana, right? Shift is very stereotypical. The idea, just more damage, auto crit, then extra shadow, nothing too crazy. This auto crit's very important as it allows us to not have to invest so much into our crit, which helps out a lot for endgame scaling of this build as we don't need crit anywhere on our gear, and it's very day one friendly, let me tell you. Very day one friendly. Here's Smoke Bomb. Smoke Bomb, the idea, Umbral Assault for the shadow chance. It makes our shadows for our Umbral Feast. It means we don't have to spend a bunch of mana on, of course, Synchronized Strike. And then we also grab 5 points of Lingering Fume, so they last longer. And of course, we have cooldown, so we have it last a decent amount of time. We grab 5 out of 5 in Smoke Blades, gives us even more flat damage that we need as much as possible. Then Silver Shrouds for a lot of extra defenses, especially considering that we're on such a low cooldown for Smoke Bomb. Then we also grab eventually Shroud of Darkness and Rapid Concealment for even more defense. And that's pretty much it for Smoke Bomb. For Umbral Blades here, very stereotypical setup, just grabbing like the Blade Storm stuff and the use when your shadows expire. Mainly the whole point of this is to simply apply bleeds on single target for us in Armor Shred. Eventually, when you have better Armor Shred. Right now, my Armor Shred isn't that good, but eventually, you'd want more Armor Shred, and that's what the Umbral Blades help with, as it just helps us with applying all of our stacks of debuffs and stuff like that. And that's pretty much it for the skills. Now, for the passives that are important, the most important one is Coated Blades for that massive 80% more damage. It's the main reason why our Lethal Mirage does so much damage. It's really good. Just 80% more damage off the rip, right? Grabbing as much attack speed as possible in the tree as well to make our gameplay feel smoother, right? Grabbing attack speed here, attack speed here. We don't grab weapons of choice for this build. That's because we are using Double Dagger and the poison chance is useless for us. We do end up grabbing all the perfection stuff. Since this build is pretty much a bosser and we can apply, 10 stacks of perfection very quickly with Puncture, we can benefit from all of the flat armor and the percent damage, making our bossing a lot better. Then we also grab 5 points all in, lots of crit multi, right? Lots of crit multi, extra shadow here, so we can have 5 shadows for our Lethal Mirage. Let's get some frailty from Spellbreaker so we don't have to get it on our items, right? Just very stereotypical stuff for a Bladedancer to be doing. Now let's talk about gear. So for gear, Fulgurite shards are your best in slot. A Fulgurite shard with melee lightning damage and crit multi would be your best in slot weapon. Same thing on the other side, melee crit multi and of course lightning flat damage. I did get lightning, I did get attack speed on this one, but it's like not important. But you kind of want really nice cooldown rolls on them. They do have rolls, so you do have to pay attention to the rolls of them. Not all of them are created equal. Then for other gear, just simply area idols. I only have 2. You definitely want 4 eventually. Now, if you really are cooked, what you can do is you can actually run HP idols and stuff like that in all these slots for when you do bossing. But when you do clearing, you definitely want the AoE idols. Also, as well here, I am running a lot of cooldown. So you have cooldown here, cooldown up. Eventually, you'd want cooldown here, and then cooldown on both rings, just to get that cooldown on our Lethal Mirage as low as possible. Getting it to 4 seconds would be absolutely insane, but that would take the most amount of gear ever. Definitely not easily achievable. You just want as much as possible, right? Now, let's talk about the rest of the gear. Just here, just like HP, just like maybe dexterity, vitality. Here, crit multi, lightning percent, like eventually HP on a better base too, probably. Chest here, increased damage while wielding a dagger. That should be. You should also be using a better base. Also, like use dexterity. Also, as well, double HP. Ring here, percent damage, eventually dexterity, resistance, and HP or endurance. Same thing with the other one. I actually use a ring of creation on it because decent opal rings are hard to come by. Belt here, cooldown recovery speed, HP, lightning damage percent eventually, and cleanse is pretty good as well on a better base. Gloves here, you want area, T7 area, attack speed, HP. You also want T7 area eventually on Jade Amulet here. Now, of course, if you're actually only bossing, you don't need these. But if you're clearing with your Lethal Mirage build, right? Like if you're actually trying to go and clear monoliths and stuff like that, you definitely want access to the area as it helps out a lot, right? Relic here, I ended up with +3 to Lethal Mirage. You eventually want +4. So of course, I am running Rending Darkness. If you don't want this, you could actually go into Blur and then go into Synchronize to get the cooldown recovery speed on Kill. This could actually reduce the amount of cooldown while you're clearing significantly, but that would reduce the amount of defenses you have or reduce the amount of single target, because you could also take these nodes out because you don't necessarily have to have them, and you can go for like this pen. This pen does get converted to lightning pen, by the way, and then 20 flat here, like more damage here. That would help out a lot in terms of the damage department, but I wanted the chunkiness from this. But like I said, you could also grab Synchronize for just extra clear. And that's pretty much it for the gearing. That's pretty much it for the character. With all that being said, this has been Dread, off to go do something else. Bye.